Man,
Hey,
how's it going?
good. How are you?
Not too bad. I like your office. It looks like what most people would have as a fake background.
Yeah, it's real. That's pretty handy.
Pretty slick. Welcome in, everyone. Thank you for coming on into another episode of Scholarly Sidetracks. Today we have on a Mike Winslow. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
I'm glad you're on the show. Very excited. For those who don't know, me and Mr. Winslow here go back to, let's see, sixth grade for me was what? -5 would be. I gotta try and figure out the math here, but I think like 2009 to 2011 ish, around there.
Y- Yes.
Something like that. So we've known
Sounds
each
right.
other off and on for a little while there when they were a
Yes.
band teacher back then, but we'll get to the whole story, but is now a principal. And for those who don't know you, what do you do and what makes you you?
Awesome. Yeah, like you said, I'm currently a principal at Sunrise Ridge Intermediate School, which is a sixth and seventh grade school here in St. George. And I've been here, this is my first year as a principal. I've been an assistant principal here at Sunrise for 2 years, and I was at a high school, Crimson Cliffs High School, as an assistant principal and athletic director before that. And then I spent 14 years teaching music, all of that here in St. George. I taught beginners, sixth and seventh grade for a couple of years, and then I taught high school for 11 years at Desert Hills High School. And I taught music, taught band, and that was my love and what I really enjoyed and wanted to do as a career is teach music and be involved in music. And so even though my career path has changed a little bit, I'm still in education, which I think is important. But music's always been a part of what I love to do, and I still find ways to stay involved in it now.
So was the first love for, music education, was it when you're like a kid, you're like, oh, I really want to teach, and later you're like, oh, I'll do music, or did you find music first and then you're like, what if I teach this?
Yeah, I found music first. I grew up in a home. My mom made sure that music was a part of our lives, so I had to start taking piano lessons when I was 8 years old, and kind of forced on me at that time. Which at 8 years old, you can't really say no to your mom. So did that for a couple of years, and then I had the opportunity to do band myself in sixth grade, and had got to pick my instrument. And I don't remember the process, but somehow I ended up with the trombone, which was fun, and started playing the trombone in sixth grade, and really kind of enjoyed that, and seemed to have some skill in that, something that I enjoyed doing. And so music was first, and so I did band all through middle school. And then in high school, my freshman year, a friend of mine forced me to try out for the school musical. I was like, singing? What is this?
That's
Weird.
dumb.
Theater? What? That's weird. And so I tried out and made this show just as an ensemble member as a freshman. But they took like 70 people, so they were probably like, yeah, he's a guy and can kind of sing, so
Pay him
we'll
for the
put him
money.
in the show. So that was my first exposure to kind of like more performing in theater and singing. One or two of my friends that were there with me were like, "Hey, you're singing in the wrong octave." Could barely sing the right notes, but they were like, "You should sing down here with the basses, or you're singing too high." So it kind of helped me catch on to what I was hearing and listening to, and I really enjoyed that a lot. And so after that, in the fall of my freshman year, I started to be more involved in other musical things. Tried out for every musical every year at the high school and was in all of those musicals. Continued to play in the band. Ended up trying out and being a part of the chamber choir at the high school I was at. In addition to being in the jazz band and the concert band, even ended up playing with the orchestra in numerous concerts there in the high school. And then, yeah, continued to do musicals. Ended up taking a theater class. Did some straight play performances. And so, kind of the performing arts really became what I did all through high school. That was my identity and what I loved to do. And it was probably my junior year of high school. I had an amazing band teacher, and you having been one of my students, I'm sure you heard some of his quotes that he would say to me that I said to you guys, because he had such an impact on my life. And I was like, man, he's great at this. I love what he's doing. I love how music is such an important part of his life and what it's doing for me. And so I felt like that's something that I thought I could be good at, was being able to teach. And one of the things that he really emphasized and that I tried to bring to when I was teaching was that music is essential, of course, and art form and creativity is an important part of anyone's life. You need to have that, I think, as a well-rounded human. But the idea that it's used to teach life lessons too. That when you work together as a team, when you put in effort, when you practice your instrument, you get better. Just those ideas of those life skills that when you put your effort into something, you're going to get better at it. You're going to develop a skill. You're going to be able to communicate better. When you are performing and creating music, you are opening up an emotional side of you that helps you communicate better with other people, helps you empathize more. There's just so many things that come with teaching music that I thought were really important for me to be able to share with other people and with students. And so it's really what led me to want to be a music educator.
Cool deal. So I always like when the stories are like a positive cats in the cradle kind of thing in this way, where you have a good teacher kind of begets more good teachers later on that like, I could really enjoy this because I had one teacher that was great and I'd like to do that too.
Right. Yep, exactly. And I great choir teacher, lots of great teachers, and that was just the music because I spent so much time in it. I wanted to be able to do that for pretty much forever. So
So do I then assume semi correctly that you go to college for a music degree?
yep, yeah.
Okay.
So I knew it was before I graduated high school. I was like, that's going to be my path is to teach music. So that was my goal through college. Went to Southern Utah University in Cedar City, Utah, and just focused on a bachelor's of music education. And actually, there at SUU at the time, it was a bachelor's of science in education with a music emphasis. Some schools have an actual bachelor's of music and music education, but the way the degree worked was all the music stuff was in the music department. And then I had to go to the education department for the education classes, which was beneficial because there's a lot of good instructional practices that are used in other classrooms that you can use in the music classroom. And so that was my plan. I did that, got my bachelor's degree in 2004 in music education, and was able to get a job, thankfully, that next fall. The first job was teaching beginners at a brand new school here in St. George. I was the first band teacher there. It was sixth and seventh grade. It was an intermediate school, like where I am now. And so kind of was able to open and start that program there with beginners. And so it worked out pretty good in that sense.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. That's about as good as you can ask for. Like, just did this, and then bang, I was getting a job. Not everyone like gets done with college, and I mean, it depends on the time, maybe I guess. And like everyone's going, well, it was easier back in 2000, whatever. I'm like, okay, sure,
Right.
but it's still nice to have it work.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked out good. Yeah, for sure. That's not always the case, but it worked out great.
So
That's it.
before we branch too much into like going from the job sector of the conversation in that sense, going back to where you're in high school, and maybe there's others listening that maybe have a variable similar experience where they're like, oh, I love music, I love the arts, I'm in all the performing things, or I kind of like art, I'm in it a little bit, but I'm kind of considering going into in this like music education or an arts related degree. I guess the first thing to go offhand, is it tough to get into that kind of degree for whatever? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, smart, for lack of words. Like, you don't necessarily have to get all A's in advanced chemistry to go do music, but maybe there's a different facet that people are like, oh, I didn't know that this was going to be what I needed to do to apply, and this is tough.
Right. Yeah, I would say that in most of the arts, if you're looking at the education side of it, if you want to be a teacher, whether you're thinking public education or eventually maybe perhaps in the college level profession, getting into those programs on the education side is not super challenging in the sense of there's a lot of extra hoops you have to jump through or that it's super competitive. Most of the time as a teacher, there's a demand for teachers. That still is the case. I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, that demand has gone up. Teachers don't stay in their profession as long as they used to, and there's a pretty big turnover rate after the first 3 years. So if you can get a teacher that's committed and will stay past 3 years, they're probably going to stick around in their career. But if a lot of them don't make it to 3 years for various reasons, lots of things. They want people in those education programs. And one of the things I always say in the arts, and that it's what's hard in the arts, is because if you look at the performing side, whether you're thinking vocal or theater or an artist in the sense of trying to sell paintings and things like that, That is a challenging field to break into on the performing side. And so, if in my mind, I love performing, I love playing my instruments, I love that, and I love being on stage in an ensemble, whatever that is. I love the performing aspect of it. But I knew that I would have a solid long term career as an educator where I could still have those opportunities to perform. Because you can perform with an education degree, you can't teach with a performance degree. And so, depending on the route you go, if you want to have more options, the education degree in the performing arts is going to give you more opportunities than trying to just focus on the performing realm, because that's a lot more competitive, a lot more challenging. Typically, to be able to make a decent living and enjoy what you're doing, you usually have to live in a big metropolis city as a performer. So it can be a really challenging thing. Whereas I feel like with the education background, you have multiple opportunities. You can perform. If you get those opportunities, great, but you can have that route of teaching in education. So
It's an interesting distinction because I would imagine some, I don't know how often, but I feel like a lot of people might kind of assume that, well, I tried the performance route, whatever, maybe nothing catches, and then I can just always fall back onto teaching. Like if you're not good enough to perform, you're good enough to teach kind of mentality
yeah,
that we won't promote.
yeah. I was very careful not to say it that way because I think that's the perception, but that's not the case. It's not that you're not good enough. It's just it's a challenging field to perform. And I think a lot of it is who you know and being in the right place in the right time. And as far as performance goes, if you know the right people, that helps you get to where you need to go in the performing world versus education. They're always looking for teachers. They're always looking for people. And even at the college level, if you want to do part-time, they're always looking for adjunct. They always need adjunct instructors. And at least in what I know in music, because you need private teachers for every instrument in a college degree. And so being able to teach part-time, perform part-time, that just opens up a big realm, a lot of realm of possibilities with you having that education background.
And so you're not doing just like deep music theory with your music education. You still get to perform, like you get to have the musicality, the artistic side still. It's not maybe the main emphasis, but you get to have that facet still.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you have to create that for yourself. And when I was teaching music, it's about the kids, and I always try to make sure it's about the kids. But when it's appropriate, when it's fun, I would get my instrument out and play with the students. I would use my instrument to teach sometimes, especially when you're teaching beginners that really haven't heard the instruments or don't know necessarily what they're supposed to sound like. They need to have it played for them. And so when I was teaching the beginners, I made sure my performance chops were up and that I could pick up my instrument and play any example I needed to so that the kids could hear, oh, that's what a staccato sounds like. Oh, that's what you mean by a crescendo. Like they got to hear it. And so I had to be able to maintain at least that level of performance to be able to demonstrate for the kids. When I moved up to high school, I found opportunities to play through the jazz band. And I didn't overdo it. Like maybe once a year, I'd bring my instrument and play one solo section at a concert or things like that, just to keep my skills up, but not take away from the kids. But then most communities have a lot of community groups. Our community here has a semi-professional community orchestra. Here in St. George, there's a professional theater company. There's also a professional theater company in Cedar City. They use live musicians for their pit orchestras, for their shows. And so for the first 10 years of my teaching career, I played professionally in those groups because they're summer performances. They don't do stuff all year. So I could teach, and then in the summer I could go and play in these pit orchestras, get paid, and be it's a professional level theater. But that really kept my chops up because I had to be able to play these shows, Broadway shows that can be pretty demanding for brass players. And so until it got a little too hard with my family, that was something that I was able to do to continue to perform while I was teaching at the same time.
Cool deal. As far as like the degree itself goes, were there any kind of hiccups along the way or any parts that made you kind of maybe second guess or like, oh, I got to make sure that this is really what I want? I'm not sure if this was just like, oh, I just knew I'm doing music education. whatever happens happens, or if there was any tumultuous times at all this for you.
Not for me. I wouldn't say tumultuous times. I would think that as you get into more of the education realm, and we get into some of the big things that come with education, like policy and the laws and some of the social things that can happen in education, there was some questioning about, am I willing to follow some of these things that maybe I'm like, I don't, why does that rule exist? Like, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. But in the end, most of the time, you can still do what you want to do as a teacher with to get the content to the kids and make sure they're having a positive experience and learning and growing, despite some of the rules that might force you to do things outside of class, like all the extra meetings and these things where you have to go and check boxes, hoop jumps we call it, where that's just part of the process of being an employee in a government agency. So even though it's a local public school, it's still a government agency, and there's still hoops and things you have to jump through that can be discouraging to some people. But for me, it was really just an attitude shift of it's education. We are here for these kids, and if we can't give them great opportunities to learn and to grow, in my mind, it's a detriment to them in the future. They're not going to be terrible people, but if they don't have a great music education, for me especially, who's going to be buying the tickets to the symphony 20 years from now? Who's going to be the ones going to Broadway shows 20 years from now? If they hated what happened in their band class, that's not going to help anybody in the future. And so to me, it was kind of identifying some of those policies or rules and say, okay, I'll jump through the hoops, but I can still do what I think is important for the kids.
I like how you say like who's going to be the future like consumers of art in that sense, because I think a lot of people, like just knowing my own friends and stuff through life, maybe you do band for 2 years, 3 years, whatever the minimum that you had to, because not everyone loves it, or like they, when you're what 14 to 16, whatever, everything besides the one thing you like sucks, I don't want to do it, I hate it, whatever. But then a few years go on, and I know lots of people who are like, yeah, I played like clarinet for 2 years. I haven't touched it a single time since. But because of that, I feel like I can hear different parts in music more. I listen to it and I enjoy it. I went and saw Wicked, and I actually like enjoyed parts, and I knew what they were saying and all kinds of like everything. I feel like they just enjoy it a lot more because they have that just a little bit of like the back end of
Right.
how's this happen? How's this go?
Yep. Yeah, that understanding and that appreciation of it.
I think more people can have that and not die. Like if someone's like, "Well, we need to cut the arts programs," I go, "No,
Yeah,
it's good
we
for
really
people."
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you've gone through the undergrad, you get that first job as a music teacher for beginners at intermediate school, yeah?
Yep, yep. Six and seven.
And what is it in that kind of rigmarole that kind of keeps steamrolling you forward? Is there a part where you're like, I want to kind of be more like if you say like keeping your chops up, I want to switch from beginner to maybe eventually high school because then I have to keep my own standard higher to keep up with them a bit, or I'm tired of hearing Ba Ba Black Sheep for the 400th time. Like, is there anything that you're kind of going through the couple years, however many years in this first position that makes you go, okay, I think I want to go this way?
Well, I would say that as soon as I was done with my undergrad, I really and I started teaching, I realized how important it was to have continuous learning opportunities. Because you think you have your undergrad and you're like, okay, I know what I need to know to go do whatever job it is. And then you get to the job and you're like, holy crap, I don't know really anything. I have some basic knowledge, but the reality is so different. And so I really wanted to continue to learn and grow and get better. And so in my mind, that was a couple of things. Obviously, for me, it was getting better at what I do in the classroom, the pedagogy part of it, attending conferences, professional development type stuff. So that I always wanted to ask people and steal other people's ideas and just hear what everyone else is doing, so I can say, oh, I could take that and I can make that work, or I can tweak that for what I'm doing. So that I was always improving, because just like you said, if you do the same thing over and over, year in and year out, it is boring for you. And so just that idea of wanting to be a little bit better every year. And And for me, the high school was really where I wanted to be teaching. That was my goal when I started, was to start in high school. I don't regret that I didn't there. Starting with beginners was a huge learning thing for me too, to help me understand. Okay, to get them to be able to play at a high school, this is what this teacher has to do, so that when a kid comes to you in high school, they already know this stuff. So that really helped me appreciate and help me be a better teacher at high school, because I knew what needed to happen to get kids there. So really, it was a continuous growth. How do I learn? How do I get better? How do I know more things to be better at what I'm doing? So, like I mentioned, professional development. But within a couple of years, I think within 3 years of teaching, I was like, hey, I think I'm ready for a master's degree, because I want to know even more. I want to get back with professors and people that have more knowledge than me, so that I can be better for my students. And so after the third year of teaching, I was starting to look around, and I was still performing professionally in the summers. So I was like, I can't do a summer program, but online colleges were just kind of starting to get really big. And Boston University was one of the first in the country to offer an online master's in music education. And so I was able to get accepted into that program, and I loved it because it wasn't going to be a well, first of all, you didn't have to take whatever test you have to take for the master's, the GRE. I can't remember what it's called now. They didn't have that requirement. You just had to have teaching experience. And the final project was actually useful, where you had to design a full unit of curriculum using a specific program. And I was like, well, that makes sense, because that's useful. If I'm going to spend all this time in a master's degree and develop something, I should be able to use it every day. And so that really excited me about the program. And so I got accepted. And so over the next year and a half, I think it was, took those classes, and was able to get a master's in music education from Boston University. But it was all online. But they had a lot of different unique classes. They had a class on the blues. And so I was able to learn all about the history of the blues, going back to, when with the guitar players in the South in the early 1900s, and they had the little glass bottle thing on their finger to get the cool sounds on guitar. Um, so learning a lot about the blues. There was a jazz history class. There was the music theory, and there was pedagogy as well that I used. But it was an awesome program. It really got me excited to be able to incorporate some of that new stuff. And so that was how I continued my education. At that point, was getting that master's.
And since you've been able to experience, your undergrad was in person, the master's is online, are there positives and negatives that you experienced from one or the other, for like others that might be like, oh, I think I should go and I like the sound of online, or I actually
Right.
hate online. Why would I want to do that? And
Yeah, I would say for me personally, the online worked for me because I was pretty motivated. And I was willing to reach out. I mean, I felt like the material was presented really well, and there was resources I could go research myself. I didn't necessarily always need to have someone there in person to ask questions, but it's because I wanted so badly to learn that I was willing to go and research. And our professors were available. They would do video chats if you needed them. But for me, the motivation was just so already there that the online was perfect for me, because I didn't want to have to go somewhere. I didn't want to have to try and be, some of them are summers only. I didn't want to have to travel somewhere. And so it was ideal for my situation. Whereas I think if I'd done my bachelor's degree online, I don't think it would have been as good, because I needed more of that hands-on stuff. I felt like that was much more interactive. But once I learned how to learn in a college setting, the master's degree was a lot easier.
yeah, I think that's an important part to the learning how to learn part is perfect, because those like, especially I remember like my freshman year, like you literally can just go in like with high school and think, oh, it's fine, I'll just go in, kind of pay attention, and it's gonna be fine. And then you get way lower grades than you thought, and you're just like, okay, well, what do I do now?
Yep, exactly. You think you're ready for it, and then it's a whole different level and every person's unique. They've got to figure out how it works for them. Um, but for me, if you're motivated, the online is going to be a good tool for you. But if you're not motivated, if you need people to help you be motivated, probably in person is going to be a better option.
Good deal. Now, just because I remember you saying something about like professional development, is that same kind of what's the word I want? That's enthusiasm you have just for kind of teaching yourself in a way. Is that the same realm for the professionalism? Like, I'm not sure how often do teachers get offered these kind of resources, or they kind of just like, well, yeah, you can go do that, but we're not like, there's
Yeah.
nothing we're going to do to help you get there in that sense.
Right. That's kind of the case. There's usually state level and national organizations associated with every content area. So there's like a national association for reading teachers. There's a national association for science teachers. There's a national association for music teachers. And the way it works is that the national organization is connected to each state. So if you join your state organization, professional organization, then you're automatically part of the national organization. And with that membership, it's a paid membership. You have to pay every year. No, the schools don't give you money for that. And so that's usually out of pocket, depending on the rules and policies. You could use, fundraising money maybe because it goes towards what you do as a teacher. It's helping you be a better teacher. But usually it's out of your own pocket that you're paying for that membership. But they do annual conferences every year where they organize 2 to 3 days, and every music teacher in the state's invited. And there's just multiple sessions. They bring in people from all over the country. Local people are invited to present. So there's workshops, performances, training sessions, a big general session. All of that is involved, and that happens every year at the state level, and they do multiple ones at the national level. So the state one was always an easy one to go to because it was in my town where I worked. So that was easy to go to, and it was always great because also the networking part that comes from that. Like I mentioned before, wanting to talk to other people, I want to steal ideas. Educators are really good thieves because if you want to steal the best stuff, and most teachers are okay with that because, yeah, they maybe developed something, but if they're willing to share, for heaven's sakes, take it, because if it works, and it's great. And so building that network and being able to just talk to other people and hear what they're doing and see that in that professional development setting just gives you so many ideas and a lot of resources to use. And so that was an easy one to do. National ones are harder. You usually have to take personal time to go to those. I've been to 2 of those in my career, at least for music specifically. I was able to go to one of the big ones called the Midwest Clinic. It's in Chicago every year. It's in December, and it's an amazing national conference. And the who's who of performers in music and educators, college professors, they're all there doing tons of sessions. The performance aspect of it, they always partner with a branch of the military, and they rotate through every year. And the military bands at the top level are some of the best in the world. The President's Own Marine Band is the best concert band in the world, hands down. The Air Force, their Airmen of Note, it's called, their jazz band is one of the top jazz bands in the world. And so you get to hear and interact with those groups every year if you go every year. But so that was an amazing thing because then you start to make connections with other people outside of your state and get even more ideas of what's happening. And then I went to the National Association for Music Educators conference one year. That was here in the state of Utah, so it was a little bit easier to get to. Same thing, just it expands your networking to be able to meet and contact people. And there's still people I met on that Chicago trip. That was almost 14 years ago that I communicate with. And then there's other big organizations like Music for All that supports a lot of things, and I've been able to network and meet a lot of people there. So I think I keep saying it over and over. These conferences is just where you meet people. It really makes a big difference with those connections.
And so do you find that music education looks like a bunch of different flavors and colors when interacting with other people? Do you find that, well, we're all kind of doing the same thing, different approaches, whether it's state requirements or social local things, like maybe if the South has more Dixieland jazz, for example, and maybe the Northeast, they only care about like strict classical, whatever.
Everyone's divided. Yeah, there's best practices that work everywhere. And that's not just a music education. I think that's an education overall, that there's just certain things that are either research based or that have just had so much experience you just know works. I think one of the big things in music education especially is building your program. As a high school teacher, if you don't have kids in your program, you don't have a job. Like, your job is based on kids signing up and being in band. And so the whole process of how you build a program from beginning band through high school, and how you recruit kids and what you do to keep them in, that's a best practice that you go any strong band program in the country. I could probably tell you the four things they do every year to ensure their program is strong, because it's what works. I did it when I was teaching. I know it works. I've seen it in some of the best bands in the country. The bands down in Texas that are really strong, they all do 4 or 5 similar things to maintain their program. It's the same with pedagogy, certain instructional things that just work well with band students. And when I've watched a college professor work with one of the top jazz bands in the country, some of the things he did about having them sing an articulation or having them clap something was like, that's what I do. That must work, because if this guy's doing it, that helps reinforce that, okay, I am doing something that's probably effective and works because I'm seeing it outside of my own building.
And at the top too, or near the top. So just because curiosity, I mean, can you give me like a roadmap of sorts? Like, hey, here's your brand new school, or you into a school now, you're back to being a band teacher, and you have to make the, from sixth grade to 12th grade program. What are some of these best practices you mentioned that helps get them in, keep them in? What are the things that you're like, we need this and this has to happen?
Yeah. So the first thing is that you need to, whoever you work with, because typically it's going to be multiple teachers in that 6 through 12 program. Whoever it is, that group of people needs to get together and decide what is essential. When this kid that signs up in sixth grade band graduates high school, what do they need to know? And create what we call a curriculum map is basically what that is, and just say, okay, in sixth grade, our goal is to teach this. By the end of sixth grade, kids should be able to do this on their instrument. At the end of seventh grade, kids should be able to do this. So you're creating these guidelines of achievements for the kids to do, so that when they get to a high school, they've already reached a certain level of proficiency. So then at the high school level, you can then be more effective at picking the music that you're going to play. You can be more effective at ensuring you're selecting repertoire that fits what the kids can do, but also can challenge them. Whereas if you don't have any communication with those people, you have no idea what's coming. They don't know what to expect. And so it's really that idea that it's not a middle school program and a high school program. It is a 6 through 12 program that you work together to create this cohesive idea of what kids need when they're going to graduate in high school in the band program. So that's one of the first things that everyone does and has, and they work closely with what we call the feeder schools. The middle school director who feeds the high school director. And the next thing is you need to have a retention plan. How are you going to keep kids in the program? And typically that's done through various ways. Most programs will use some type of traveling to keep kids interested and excited about it. And the older you get in the program, the bigger the travel is. So in middle school, you'll do some local festivals and go and travel and get adjudicated at local festivals. Maybe later in middle school, you can travel a little bit further away to some bigger festivals, things like that. But then in high school, that's where you can do some of the bigger trips and experiences. You have region competitions, you have state festivals that you have to qualify for. You can do out-of-state travel. You're aware of this. One of our big things was a California trip. And so every couple of years, we organized a big trip. And yes, it's fun, and we go to Disneyland and do all the things. But the core component of that is the performance. They're making sure they're performing in a place that is fun and recognizable, but also challenging. You are performing in front of people, and so it has to be good. You have to have that idea that we can't just show up and not play well. So there's still that focus on a high performance level, but then they also get to do a workshop. They get to go into a recording studio and experience what that's like as a musician to have to record something. And to just know and say, okay, is this something I could do? Could I walk into a studio tomorrow and sight read a piece perfectly on the third time? Like, that's what they experience in this workshop. And so having those experiences, and like I said, it's travel. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily have to be travel, but experiences the kids get to have that they talk about, because then that word spreads. And the teachers in sixth grade can start talking about it and say, hey, guess what? When you're in ninth grade, this trip's going to happen. You want to stay in band for that because it's amazing. And siblings will start to talk to each other and becomes a big family thing. And so that really helps build the program and build the excitement about it. Third thing is you need to have a strong parent organization. A lot of schools might call it a booster organization, but the point is that you have some type of parent organization that is there to support the teachers and the program, because running any program, whether you're talking about a football program, any big program, where you're traveling, performing, doing a lot of things outside of school hours, you need help. Teachers and coaches need help. And so having a parent organization that can do a lot of the background work, that can support with fundraising, that can do a lot of that, really can help build the program. And it's the same thing. If the parents are brought into the program, the kids are going to stay. Most of the time because the kids like it. Sometimes the parents make them. But even then, they're in the program. And so if you have a strong parent organization that starts earlier before high school, those parents then are also bought into the program with the kids, and they're more likely to stay in the program throughout that time. I think the fourth and the biggest thing is that you have to have good music selection. If you're not playing music that kids like and that they're challenged and that they have success with, they're not going to stay in the program. And that doesn't mean you play fluff rock and roll music every concert, but there's got to be some concerts where you play fun music, soundtrack music, Christmas, of course, Christmas music, things like that. Yeah, that has a part, and kids need to be able to play fun music that they know and recognize. But there also has to be the component of challenging classical style music that they're performing, that they're getting judged on and getting feedback on, because that's the challenge part. And they don't have to be perfect, but just that idea that we're challenging them, we're going to reach this expectation, and they're going to sound good. And they're going to feel successful because they sounded good. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what grade level you're at with that. If you're a beginning band, as long as they sound good for a beginning band and a judge can give them some recognizable feedback and say, yes, I can hear this and this and this, that is success. And kids feel that and sense that, and they're like, oh, I like that. I want to be better now. I want to practice more. So that the repertoire and how you pick music and let the kids perform, I think, is the other thing. So to me, those are the four really key components of how you're going to build a strong program.
And only because it just kind of came into my head while you're talking. I'm always for, obviously, music is one, but any of the arts of like getting kids to be in it and sorts. So for on the off chance there's anyone listening that maybe they're a parent and they're like, hey, I got a kid who's getting to be about the age where they kind of need to figure out whether they're going to be theater, band, physical media, whatever sort of things. What would be some benefits that you would promote music for? Not necessarily to bash the other arts and say, these ones suck, we're better, but what makes music a good choice? Or what do you tell people if anyone's like, ooh, do I want to commit my kid to this?
Right. Yeah, it is. Music and instrumental music specifically is a big commitment of time and money for the family, because eventually you're going to have an instrument that you're investing in. To me, I would say that it's the long-term benefits of being enrolled in a music class. And I would put all of the arts in that, not just music. I think that theater, dance, all types of music, choral, instrumental, the performing arts, the benefits that come from that socially and academically far outweigh any of the challenges that you might face. Even if it comes down to I have to choose sometimes between going to a music thing and going to a sports thing that I like to do also, try and find a way to do both. There's a lot of important lessons that come from sports. There's things that kids learn on a field or on the court that really can't be taught anywhere else, except, I think, in the performing arts. Things like resilience. Things like, again, hard work and effort. That idea that you don't get something for nothing. You're not going to be an amazing quarterback if you just stand around and watch somebody else throw the ball. You're not going to be an amazing trombone player if you stand around and just do this. You have to practice. You have to put in the time. And those benefits that come from being enrolled in a performing arts class are going to be with students the rest of their life. That's why I would say it's worth it. It doesn't necessarily matter which one. If you're concerned about the commitment, I would say try it out when they're younger for sure. Start in band or orchestra. If it becomes too much, you've got other performing arts options. Choir is always an option. But they'll have a strong music foundation if they do choir later on, because they learned how to read music in band. Theater it's performing arts, the same idea of putting in hard work and putting something out to people. So yeah, I just think it's worth it to put in the time and try it. And like you mentioned earlier, even if they only do it for 2 or 3 years, there's even research behind that that shows at least 2 to 3 years of involvement in a performing art has academic benefits. You're a better reader. You're more likely to graduate from high school. You're a better communicator from participating in those activities.
It is funny how it's like some socket in your brain that somehow gets like turned on when you, if it's
Yes.
music or whatever arts, kind of that helps make everything else around it a little bit smarter, better,
Yep.
whatever.
Yep. It's true.
Okay, cool. So get your kids into art. That's the fast way
Yep.
to
There
say
you go.
all that.
Yes. Do it.
So going back to your story, you now have your master's, and what happens or then? What's next?
Yeah, so I have my master's and have the opportunity to move to a high school and to open. Same thing, I was able to open a new school. And so a high school was opening, and I reached out to the principal and just like, hey, I'd love to talk with you about it. And it worked out and got hired to go and open Desert Hills High School as the first band teacher there. And that was really my goal, was to get to high school and to be able to build a high school program. And so that those first couple years, opening a school is always an adventure. The first year I had 40 kids in band total. I had to split schools. I wasn't full time at one school because I didn't have enough students. So I was teaching some beginning band at one building and then driving to the high school and teaching band at the high school. I was doing that every day to start out. And you can't do this anymore. But even just to maintain the program, the first year I had to pick up the drum set player every day to bring him to jazz band because he couldn't get a ride. So if I wanted a drum set player at school, I had to
Better
be
go
the
get
one
them.
at school. And of course, his parents knew, and we had permission for that. But it's those types of things that to build, sometimes to start a program, that you have to do and put in a little bit extra time to make that happen. But we just worked, everything I just mentioned, we worked hard to do. My wife ended up being the feeder teacher. She was the beginning band teacher of the kids that were coming to me. The person that taught at our middle school, that was, so, in our district, we have intermediate school, middle school, high school. So we have 3 schools for 6th through 12th grade. So the band teacher that was between my wife and I at the middle school was a friend of ours. Great, very similar philosophy of music education. And so that first year we did what I mentioned. We sat down and did a curriculum map and just said, what do we want our kids to know? How can they be the best musicians by the time they graduate from 12th grade by being a part of our band program? And we did a California trip the second year that we were there at Desert Hills, and it was a very small group. We did take the band, orchestra, and choir together. I think there was maybe 100 kids total that went.
All three.
Yeah, out of all 3 groups. Well, yeah, the second year of the school, first year we did the trip. But then we just, all those things we talked about, we tried to implement throughout those years. And being there 11 years, we got our parent organization started, I think, in year 6 or 7 of that. And I haven't taught at Desert Hills now for 6 years. But that parent organization that we started over 10 years ago is still going strong. They still meet and have fundraisers and are an amazing group of parents that continue to support that band program, even though none of the teachers that were there when we started teach there now. It's all different personnel, but the parent organization still exists and still is strong. I was able to grow the band program. Again, you can't do it by yourself. You have the support of the middle school and the intermediate school teacher, and we were able to grow the band program. To the time I left, 11 years, I had over 100 kids just in band. We were the only school in our district that had an auditioned wind ensemble and a concert band. I had percussion class. I was able to teach AP music theory. I was able to teach music 1010 through our local university, concurrent enrollment. And so we were able to just grow the program a lot. And that was really my focus, was just to try and create an amazing experience for the kids so that by the time they left, they loved music. They didn't need to be a music teacher. They didn't need to play their instrument again, but just that appreciation and understanding that they had a great experience as a musician in high school. And I humbly feel like we did a decent job at that. And the program is still strong today. The jazz band at Desert Hills High School last year was the top jazz band in the state of Utah, which is an awesome credit to the kids that are there and to the teacher that's there. But just knowing that maybe I had a little hand in help ensure that that happened, that there was a place that that could continue to happen for kids, even though I haven't been there for 6 years. Um, so that became a big focus, and continued professional development, lots of professional development, asking questions, reaching out to other teachers. Technology got a lot easier, so Google Chats and things like that were a lot easier to do, video chats. One year, we were able to have the band perform at our state music educators convention, which is a huge deal. It was an audition only thing, so we had to submit a video, and we were selected to perform in the general session. That whole year in preparation for that, I reached out to people throughout the country, professional musicians that I knew, to work with my students. And so twice a month, I had my students doing sectionals with people all over the country. I had a clarinet player and a flute player that lived in New York City, and they would Zoom and do sessions with my sections. So the clarinet section would have a computer, and they'd be doing a Zoom with this professional player that lived in New York. There's local people I brought in. And so just even that opportunity of being able to reach out to those people and say, here's our goal, here's what we're trying to do, and to have them respond and say great, and do it for a very minimal amount of money compared to their skill, because it's for students, it's for education. And so the network connections paid off in those times when I needed some help.
It's
So,
funny, like how I totally get the like I think I had a little play in all this, like the kindling that started the big fire that it is.
yeah.
Because I noticed how at least two schools you started the program for, like the music program. So I was like, is that something that they give the lackey teachers that they're like, oh, you're kind of new, here you go, or that it's a testament to like, oh no, he actually seems like he'd be able to get something to work. Let's put him in.
Maybe I don't really know why they picked me, but it worked out.
Yeah, everyone seemed to have benefited, so yay.
Kind of interesting during that time, though, that was when I started thinking about future career choices. Because as an educator, you don't really have a lot of opportunities to grow in the career, to increase your income without leaving the classroom, which is one of the unfortunate things in public education. Is that if you want to have better pay, basically, you have to look at some administration level jobs, which takes you out of the classroom. And so that with me, and my wife's an educator as well, music educator, and 3 kids, and all, just having a family, things like that. At some point, it realized, hey, I really need to do something maybe to help increase the income for our family, because I love teaching, I love education, and they do their best with funding, and that's a whole other discussion we could have about how that works and whether it's right or not. And you don't go into teaching to be rich. That's not why you do it. Going in, you're not going to be filthy rich as a teacher. So you don't do it for that reason. But realities of life, you've got to do some things. And so that's when I started looking into administration, because I knew that was about the only other place I could go to stay in education, because I think it's important. Music itself is important. Music education is important. Education in general is important. That was kind of my hierarchy there.
That's the base.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I don't want to leave education. I don't want to go to college, because I didn't want to at that point, I didn't want to do a doctorate because I didn't want to pay for it. I would love to do a PhD at some point. But that would have been the only other option to increase my pay as a teacher, is to go back and get a higher degree. And so I chose to go the administration route. And so those last couple of years, while I was teaching high school, I did have to go back to school to get an endorsement to be an administrator. So any administrator, at least in the state of Utah, you have to go back to school and either get a master's in educational leadership, or you have to do basically the same amount of classes minus like one class and get your endorsement as an administrator for your teaching license. And so I'd already done a master's degree. I was like, I don't necessarily want another master's. But essentially I did the same amount of work. It was like 32 master's credits that I had to do to get my administration endorsement. And it was great learning a lot of that stuff. You do a lot of the history of education, and you learn a lot more about financial things of how that works. But so at that time, I went and did that and got the administrative endorsement added to my license, so that I could then start applying for administrative jobs.
And for anyone who might want to do administration, initially it sounds dry. It sounds not the most exciting 32 credits or whatever. Am I, is that a wrong idea to have?
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily dry. Um,
Okay.
I think that there's well, and again, I think it comes down to your motivation and why you're doing it. I always love to learn new things. So even though I was an educator and I went through an education program, they obviously can't teach you everything in an undergrad program. And so the classes that I took in this administrative program was a lot more about the history of education and philosophy of education and um, learning about some of the components of, especially particular in America, the history of American education and things like that. I didn't know really any of that, and so that was really neat to learn and to be able to see where we are now. There was a educational law course that I took that just did a lot of review about case law revolving around education, Supreme Court law, those types of things, which really helped shape and see where we are today and helps me as an administrator know I probably shouldn't do that because that's going against the
That's
law.
illegal.
And so that was all helpful. The financial part was really good because how schools are funded is pretty complex, and what you can use certain money for because because it is public funding. There's very clear criteria about what money can be used for what, and I didn't really know any of that. And so there was a lot of good information. But again, I was motivated and wanted to learn it. If you don't necessarily want to know that stuff, then maybe that degree or that endorsement might not interest you. But regardless, you have to have it if you're interested in that position. So,
And this is still taught at a university? Is there a
uh,
separate entity thing that teaches?
no, they're all university level.
Okay.
So,
Oh, it's a funny thing. Like, if you don't want to know this information, it's like, well, that's going to be kind of your
yeah,
job. So you might want to know it.
yeah. I think that's kind of a misnomer about administration is I don't think people realize how much you are responsible at a school level to maintain well, legality first of all, but just to have to know a lot of that stuff because yeah, you have district administration and you have legislators and all those things. But really, the buck stops with the principal. I have to sign off on every dollar that's spent in our school, and I have to know, okay, is that okay for them to spend? Is that okay for them to use that account to buy that thing? Knowing it, like it said, knowing about case law, special education, for example, knowing what you can and can't do as you work with students that have disabilities and that have an IEP, knowing how to support parents and knowing when you can say that's not quite the best way to support your student without saying, no, you can't do that. Oh, we're going to sue you. Like knowing where that line is of, okay, we want to do what's best for your student, but maybe there's other ways you can do it compared to what you're trying to tell us as a parent. Not that we don't distrust you, it's your kid, but we're the experts in the classroom. Can we try this? And knowing how those conversations can go to support students. So I don't think people realize sometimes how much that falls on the principal in a building to be able to manage and be responsible for all of that stuff. Every hiring thing that you do. So you're an HR manager as a principal too. You have an HR department at a district level, but I do all the hiring. So I have to know how to interview. I have to know how to ask good questions. I have to know how to hire a custodian and how to hire a good teacher. I have to know how to hire a good lunch worker and how to hire an effective secretary. Like all of those things you do as a principal that no one really thinks about until you're in it. And because it really everything runs through the principal of a school. So it's a very complex job that you need that background knowledge to be able to inform your decisions.
And as far as what is under the umbrella of administration, because, principal, assistant principal, that's easy. When does it cross from, custodian, educators to administration? Like, what's the then bottom of administration that an educator might transition to then be in that world?
Right. It's different in districts and states, but typically your first step into administration is going to be an assistant principal role. Some schools might have what they call coordinators at a school level. For example, in elementary schools, there's Title I schools where they're low income schools, and so because a certain percentage of their students are considered low income, they get extra funding to support an additional position, which is essentially an assistant principal for an elementary school, but it's not called that. So it's a coordinator position is typically what it's called. So it's going to be some of those things, but typically it's the assistant principal is where you're going to start. And so that role is actually quite different from the principal role, because typically the assistant principal is what you call the student services. They're the ones that deal with all the behavior issues, with all of the basically with student services. You're talking about not only behavior but classroom management, all the things that go with like emergency preparedness in your building. A lot of that falls under the assistant principal realm. And again, I'm speaking for our district. It could be different in other districts about what their responsibilities are. But the student discipline and the student behaviors is a big part of the assistant principal role in secondary schools. At elementary level, they typically don't have an assistant principal. And so the principal in elementary school does everything I mentioned just barely about the principal job that can be challenging, and they have to deal with student behavior because they don't have an assistant. But elementary schools are typically smaller student population than secondary schools. So, but still, that would be a challenge. And so part of that is, where do you want to go? If you want to start in elementary, you're going to go straight from probably being a teacher to an elementary principal. If you're going to stay in the secondary realm, you're going to be teacher, assistant principal, and then at some point, if you're interested, you would apply for the principal position.
And I'm assuming that's how your track went: music teacher, then assistant principal.
Yep. I was assistant principal and an athletic director. So in our district at our high schools, they have two assistant principals, but one of them is also the athletic director. And so I was an assistant principal. I was an administrator, but my main role was over the athletic department and everything that goes with that. I would assist our assistant principal if there were some big discipline issues involving lots of kids, things like that. Still did all the supervisory stuff as assistant principal, going to dances, all of that type stuff that you have to do. But my main role was over athletics when I started. But then when I shifted here to Sunrise with 6th and 7th grade, the athletics go away. They don't have it at this level here. So then it really was a true assistant principal position where you're focused on the behaviors and student services.
Since you've had a good deal of personal experience being the assistant principal, and they can oftentimes have the what's the word I want? People might assume that you're Mr. Kibosh walking around like, oh no, it's Mr. Winslow, look out.
Mr. Real Fun.
Yeah, is that just like a small sliver that people see and they expand out in their mind? Is that not really
Yeah, I
what
think
you're
that's
doing?
I think it's partly true, because unfortunately, when something bad happens with a student, they go to the assistant principal's office first. Like that's where they get sent. But you don't have to always be the bad guy. In those situations, of course, you have to deal with the situation. If consequences are warranted, you need to follow through with those to maintain the order of the school, right? To ensure things don't get crazy. And students need to know that there's consequences for their actions that disrupt the classroom, that are unsafe, things like that. But, and again, I'm speaking for my experience. I know this isn't true in every school. But I would say most schools, you're not dealing with 50% of the population in regards to bad, tough, disciplined things. If you are, that's a big concern in your school. Where I think 20 to 30% at some point in the year, you might be dealing with, if you told them all up, maybe 20% of your student population that you deal with either on an ongoing basis or a very serious thing. And so for the rest of the student body, you can build relationships with the kids that are in a positive way. You're out in the hallways, you're at assemblies, you're talking to kids at lunch, you're because you're supervising a lot before and after school, just having conversations with kids, getting to know them, building those relationships in a positive way outside of the office where you have to discipline. It can kind of eliminate that whole stereotype of the mean guy walking down the hall, run away because it's the assistant principal. It doesn't have to be that. But kids need to know also that you are that person that's going to do that when you have to. So that was finding that line can be tough, I think, sometimes, to know how sometimes policy tells you what you have to do, especially with safety situations. You have to do what policy tells you have to do. Whereas with other kind of behavior or disciplinary issues, sometimes you have some leeway and some choices about how you're going to handle it with a student. And so that really starts to develop as you decide what's essential, what's most important in our building, what do we think is important for kids to learn from these experiences. So that really helps kind of develop who you are. But yeah, it doesn't have to be the stereotypical bad guy all the time.
Is good, because I think that's one thing that some people might get kind of like they just think to the one level and then they're like, okay, that's just what it is. But you're like, you gotta deal with like what you say, the balancing act of it. Like, yes, someone has to be like, hey, this is the structure of things. We need to make sure that everyone knows, hey, this is how we're all gonna generally fit and get along with each other because we're all trying to be educated in 14 different ways, and that everyone should be able to do that. So if anyone starts messing with that, yeah, we got to knock them down, be like, hey, no, none of that, or,
Right.
in nicer ways, but,
Right. Yep.
however it is to,
And hold them to those expectations.
right. And that they're not afraid to exist, that it's not at all like a rigid thing. Like, if I barely sway, they're going to chop my head off. No, it's just, if we'll kind of help guide you down, but
Right.
that's a whole thing.
Yeah. Where the line is, helping them know where the line is, and teaching them when they crossed it. I think especially at this age when they're a little bit younger, 6th and 7th grade, they don't always understand why crossing the line was bad. And so that there's a lot of teaching involved at this age with that part of it, is saying this is what you did and this is why it's not acceptable or why it's not appropriate because of this and this and this.
There's like whether people like it all the way because they might get defensive with this word, but there is a decent deal of parenting that can happen at these levels depending on, not saying whether you're good or bad of a parent that because your kid acted out,
Exactly.
psychology is so complicated, but it's not just, people don't just get parented by their parents. You kind of get parented by anyone a year older even.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're in the school for 8 hours a day with adults. And so we're teaching content, but we're also teaching life skills and appropriate behavior and expectations.
And so what makes you want to go from assistant principal to principal besides just, that's the top of the chain?
Yeah, I think part of it for me, like when I was teaching and being able to lead an organization, and that's how I've come to view it, is that teachers, any teacher in a classroom is a leader in the classroom. They're the CEO of the classroom, right? You think about a coach over an organization, some of these big football programs in high schools, colleges, any coach really, and any teacher that's over a program that is more than just a classroom is even more of a CEO and a leader. You're setting the tone and the culture for your program and for your classroom. And what you accept becomes part of your culture. And so just knowing as a leader, this is what I think is important. This is what is essential. I really enjoyed building that in my teaching and in my classroom. And so I wanted to take that idea and try and do that at the school level. I wanted to be able to say, this is what I think is essential that every kid should be able to do, and what is effective teaching, and making sure that what's happening in our classrooms most of the time is research based and scientific and effective. That doesn't mean we have to be rigid and mean all the time and not have any fun. But there's certain instructional strategies that we know work. And I want to make sure that we're doing that so that our kids are growing and learning and being successful. And I also wanted to be in a position to ensure that the arts are strong in my school, because I know it's important. Not only for me and, of course, my background, but I think kids need it. I think that has to be an essential part of their education. And sometimes choices about how you're going to staff your building with teachers and where you put your priorities can affect the arts. Sometimes schools don't have a choice. Sometimes funding, as I mentioned before, how schools are funded, sometimes funding for specific programs gets pulled or cut and has to go somewhere else. If that's the case, there's not a lot I can do. But in the meantime, if I can support it in my building, I'm going to make sure that it's a strong thing in my building for kids to have a quality experience. Because language arts matters, science matters. You have to know that stuff. But kids need a place to go for an outlet. They need PE. They need to have a music class. They need to have STEM is something we offer, where it's a lot of project-based in building and learning as you connect science and technology together. And so I wanted to try and have that opportunity at a school level to see what I could do to support students and teachers.
Well, it's good to know that at least one principal has this well-rounded idea, because like one thing and it's funny because in my own life, I've had a lot of experiences both being in the arts and then in the sciences. And yes, there's the stereotypes that exist strongly in both of, woo-woo world and strict, rigid, like how you say like, oh, everything's scientific based, and people are, oh, no, that's bad. I wish that there was more showing that science is good. No, we're showing that this is why it works because we proved that this isn't wrong. That's the whole point of science, is finding what does, is this wrong? It's not, is this right? Is it wrong? Nope. Okay, cool.
Right.
And to have it to where people more often think about STEAM and the whole thing. I piss off all kinds of people when I say STEAM because like it's STEM. I don't need the arts, and you're like, no, you do. And then you go over to the arts, you're like, I don't want to learn math and stuff. I go, no, you need that too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's well rounded, and I think that people miss that connection. It's easy, at least in my knowledge with music especially, it's so easy to teach these other subjects. And I'm not saying you become a science teacher because you're a music teacher, but at a high school level especially, you can take time and talk about sound waves and talk about how, like when you're trying to tune an instrument, it's all about sound waves. If you're out of tune with someone else, it's because your frequencies aren't matching. And you can show that on an oscillator. Like that's a cool science thing that someone could do very easily in a music classroom to support what's happening somewhere else. Kids read a fraction every time they look at their sheet music because the time signature is a fraction. And so just that idea that it has to be connected, and it makes you a better person when you know all of these things and see how they work together.
Yeah, we don't have to. Not every single person is a banner of like, oh, I'm a science guy, I'm a music guy, I don't do anything. Like, you don't have to be great at everything. Some
Right.
of us might only be good at one thing, but to
Right.
still have that like under your belt, a little bit of a familiarity with fractions, to not be scared of math, to enjoy a little bit of art, to or even just be like, I think the minimum would be that you're just fine with art existing in the world. That'd be all I ask of people. That they won't kibosh it to death, and then it's fine.
Well, and I think you think about if you were to look at any community orchestra that's a decent community orchestra, where it's mostly made up of people in the community, not music teachers, right? You look at the people that are in that group, how many of them are doctors? How many of them are scientists? How many of them are engineers that played in high school and chose this amazing career, but still play their instrument? I just there's so much of that because it's still connected, and music can be an outlet for you. It doesn't have to be a profession, but you can go and do your job and be an amazing physician and then go and play in a symphony at night and still be good and enjoy it and use that creative outlet to support what you're doing every day in your career. So it doesn't have to be separate things. They can be together.
So I have in my head now two talking points, I guess, for lack of words. The first one is I realize for any student that might be listening that a lot of what we've been talking about has kind of been like the 6 through 12 program that generally, you kind of you find the path and you ride that the whole way. What would you say for music specifically would be ways, let's say someone who's a sophomore in high school or even a junior, that they're kind of late to the game and they're like, I want to get into band or music or choir or whatever. Am I too late? What do I even do now? Like, I can't be in beginning band anymore. What's
Right.
even an option for me?
No, that I think it's a great question to think about. I would say there's multiple options. And any choir teacher listening might be mad at me, but choir is typically one of those things you can join almost any time and learn and do well. Because you don't have to have the background pedagogy of how to hold an instrument and how to develop those skills of an instrument versus the voice that you use all the time. So choir can be an easy in to music to start with. I think that trying to get into a band program in a high school is challenging. But the other route you could go if you want to learn an instrument is find a private teacher. Find the instrument you want, and most communities are going to have teachers that teach privately on that instrument. Obviously, guitar is a big one. It's not always taught in schools. And so there's a lot of private teachers on guitar. But even if you want to say, hey, I think the saxophone is super cool, I want to learn that, go find a private teacher for a year, and you'll probably be caught up enough to then join the band the next year. Because with private instruction, obviously you can move faster and get better faster because it's one-on-one setting. So I'd say it's never too late to get involved in music in some form. And now with YouTube and all the technology out there, I know there's apps out there you can teach yourself. You can watch the videos, and if you put in the effort and you practice and you follow the instruction in those videos, you're gonna learn the instrument that you want. So I think there's a lot of avenues now for you to get involved in music, even if you're a junior in high school.
It's funny that you thought that you said saxophone because I'm sitting there like, oh, that's just like my story because I didn't have to do it that late. But for anyone else who's a musician, that there's a difference between brass and woodwinds. And my story was, I learned trumpet because it was one of the like 4 or 5 beginner instruments that you could branch to later. Then the seventh grade, I was in French horn, and kind of out of nowhere, I'm like, I want to learn saxophone, and it was kind of like, okay. At the time, I had Mr. Schmidt, and it was kind of like one of those things. He goes, well, the school season's over. You have a summer. Go rent a saxophone, and here's a book. Good luck, kind of thing. I'm like, go figure it out. So I just went into, like, I think I was living. I had my bedroom was a garage of this house we were staying at, I think, and I just went in there with this like 1950s saxophone, squawking my brains out just to, because I wanted to figure it out, and that's kind of all you need to get it going. And I did get good enough to be in the band later on and such, but that first part, really, all that you care about is like, do you want it? And
Right.
sure, you can have it. Like that's kind of all it is.
Yeah, the motivation and desire, and then finding the tools to do it.
Yep. And the second talking point for this bit before we get near the end, with the dynamic of the world of education as it is right now,
Yeah.
what would be some hopeful things that you might say for anyone who's like, I really want to be an educator, I want to be in administration, I want to do music, blah, XYZ, whatever, just some kind of education? What would be kind of the silver linings or the positives, or it's not that bad, it's actually like this? Anything that you would speak on to try and get people to be okay with
Yeah.
still being an educator?
Yeah, 100%. And I would say that it's kind of a general rule with everything that the minority is usually the loudest. And so what you hear on the news and some of the horror stories of terrible teachers, that is the vast, very small minority of the teaching profession. Unfortunately, there are bad people that end up becoming a teacher. They do bad things. There's bad people in every profession that do bad. The teachers get a lot more airtime and a lot more publicity because they work with kids, right? There's that additional thing that comes with the job that you're working with kids. And so when bad things happen, it gets publicized and blown up a lot. And I would say that the most positive thing I know is that is a rare thing in education. That what you hear about in the news about, and especially now on X or Twitter, the things you see about these terrible teachers, yes, it's true and it happens, but that's one teacher out of a district of 3,000. Like our district has 3,500 employees, just in our district here. And so the millions and millions of teachers that are out there are good people that are working hard to make a difference. And I think that's the other thing that I would just tell you is that even on your worst day as a teacher, when you are so tired and exhausted and think you didn't do anything to help kids that day, I guarantee you did something for a kid. You might not know it yet, but the impact you have on a kid is real. It's true. I just know that it's very discouraging sometimes, and teachers especially feel that sometimes they're not making a difference. And maybe you're not getting your test scores higher on the state test. It's something we have to look at, but in the end, you are there as a person working with other people to make kids be a better citizen and a more knowledgeable person. And you're going to accomplish that. It's not going to be perfect, and you're going to be tired, but you're going to make a difference in a kid's life. That's to me, I just can't emphasize that enough, that it does happen. That all the stories you don't hear is about all the good things that happen that teachers do. A current kind of guru in education I'm sure he's not the first one to say this, but teaching and education is what creates every other profession in the world. Just the nature of what we do in our school system in America, everyone that has a job went to school. Everyone that has a job, that has a high school diploma, or even not a high school diploma, maybe they had to get some other route, but everyone at some point went to school and learned things. With the homeschool realm, you still had to learn, right? You still had, your parent was your teacher, but you were still taught skills and things and knowledge that you need to be successful as an adult in whatever career you choose. And so you're going to have a positive influence on people. Some subjects are harder than others. The arts and some of those elective classes are a little bit easier because kids choose to do them. Kids don't get to choose to take math. They have to take math. But a good teacher can make them excited about math. They don't have to love it. They don't have to be a scientist when they graduate high school, but a teacher that loves their subject, that is passionate about why it's essential, kids catch on to that. Kids see that you care about them as a person and that you love your subject, and they're going to respond to that, and you're going to make an impact on their life. That's what I would say for anyone considering it. It's challenging. It's going to be hard, but you will make a difference for kids in their lives. I promise.
That's good to hear because, I'm in theory, that's what a lot of teachers were going into the field for. Like I want to be the reason that people get to be better, that they get to be happy and smart and enjoy life, whatever. And like when you mentioned how, not too often do you get to hear the good stories of teachers. It's usually only like conversations like, oh, I remember I had Mr. Winslow and we had this whole thing. But like usually that's like a personal conversation. It's only when you get to be the top teacher for 20 years or they finally do like a little magazine snippet. But it's like they don't really talk about good teachers besides, National Teacher Appreciation Day. You get the big swap over and like, all right, we talked about all of them. Bye bye. And
yeah, exactly.
Paints a different color.
Yeah. I just, the influence that educators have in our country and the sphere of really pretty much anything, I think sometimes it's underestimated. And again, even if a kid didn't love school or didn't do well in school, didn't like school, I can guarantee every person still had an adult in that school at some point that made an impact on them positively. Even if they came out hating everything about math and language arts, or they hated band because the teacher was mean, at some other point in their educational life, there was an adult in that building that had a positive influence on them. It's impossible for every kid to have a positive experience in every class, right? That's never going to happen. But that doesn't mean that there's not good things happening every day.
Good deal. That's good. Okay, and I guess before I do the last little snippets for the show, principal now, something different tomorrow? Are you kind of just like be in this role for now and not really worried about what next steps, if any?
I haven't thought too much ahead. The principal role, like I said, is very complex, and it takes a couple years to make an impact in a building as a new leader. So I definitely intend on putting a lot of effort and focus in the next 5 or 6 years, at least in this one position here. I could see myself at some point maybe moving to the district office level, some type of support role up there. But for now, it's just let me figure out how to be a good leader and hopefully find a way to make an impact to support the teachers and the kids in this role.
That's good. There is one thing to be looking to the future and where could I go, but to comfortably sit in the spot that you're in, that's a healthy mindset.
Thanks.
So for our 2 final bits that I do for everyone on the show, the first one is the big scary.
Okay.
You get to have one redo to your entire life. I've noticed that you had a pretty straightforward, in my opinion, life as far as it sounded. Pretty consistent in that, you liked music in high school, went to do music education, and it all went off of that. But maybe on the back end, there was some part that you're like, I really wish I would have. Maybe I would have done the master's in person now that I went through it. Like, it was great at the time, but I realized blah, blah, blah. Whether it was a small thing or a big thing, is there anything from high school to today that if you had to redo, or if someone was in the same position as you were then, that you'd be like, hey, maybe try this instead?
Yeah. Man, that's a tough one. I don't know. As I look back on my career and education, what I've learned and how education is my profession, I think the only thing that I would say that maybe I would think a little bit more about is how I pursued my advanced degrees. Like I said, I love my master's degree, and it was great. It was a music education. I wish I would have known when I was doing that in 5 years I was going to be interested in educational leadership, because then I probably would have done 1 master's in that. Not that I didn't love everything I learned, but just that idea that instead of basically doing 2 masters, I could have done 1. But that's really, I think that's all the only thing I would say. For my undergrad, and I tell people this all the time when I talk often to kids in their college classes that are about ready to graduate and go into their student teaching, I tell them all the time that once you graduate, or once you're in your final year of college, and when you're looking for jobs, at least in the education world, the college you went to doesn't really matter. What matters is that you had a good experience and that you are solid educationally, that you can portray to whoever's interviewing you that you're passionate about your subject, that you know your subject, and that you want to be a good teacher. It doesn't matter what college is on the paper and the degree you're from. Because I would say that with Boston, I loved everything about Boston University, and at the time it was ideal. It was online, but in the end, to help me get where I needed to go in my career, I could have done my master's somewhere else for cheaper and had the same opportunities. And so I would caution and just be aware that, because I graduated from a small college in a small town in southern Utah, and that has not held me back at all in any way, because it was more about my experiences and about the opportunities that I tried to find and create for myself, and my professional development and my growth. It didn't necessarily matter what it said on my degree, just that I had one. That's really what mattered.
That's good that, school in the end, it's still more about the students and the people that come out of it, not necessarily
Yes.
the building that they
Right. Yeah, it's not the
spit
name,
out from.
really. Yeah. And that's not true in every profession. I know that there's some professions that if you went to Harvard, you're probably going to have a better shot at getting a job than one that didn't. But
The little gotcha names.
yeah, but at least in education, I would say that's not necessarily the case.
Okay. And then for our final little bit here, it's where you get to have 30 seconds, 30 minutes of unfettered time where I'm not going to prompt you in any sort of way besides if there's anything else that you wish to say in this episode, whether it's a part of the story you wish you wanted to say but I didn't prompt it out of you, or you want to be inspirational, funny, or literally just tell everyone, thanks for watching, goodbye. If there's anything you'd like to say here at the end, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good one. In this particular role as principal, and thinking a lot more about how teachers teach and what's effective, and really looking back at my career as a music educator, but also as a musician, because I mentioned I performed professionally early on in my career in the summers when I wasn't teaching. In the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to be a part of what's called the Band Directors Marching Band, which is put together a national organization of band directors that were invited to participate in some of the big parades around the country. And so 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to join this organization and march in the Rose Parade on New Year's Day. And as a music educator, like, that's a dream thing to take your band to. As a teacher, you want that, like, that's top level, really tier thing to get your band to go and perform at. But as an adult, where I'm just going as a band teacher with other band teachers, it was an awesome experience, but it really reminded me and pushed me to be a better musician, because now I had to start practicing. I had to memorize 3 songs. I had to be in a physical condition to march 6 miles. The Rose Parade is 6.5 miles long. So I had to get my chops up. I had to remember how to march. I had to remember all of those things that I used to be really good at. I had to come back to that. And the only way I could do that was to practice. The only way to get better at something is to practice that skill. And it's the same thing as a teacher. Being a good teacher, you practice good strategies. You practice effective things in front of the kids. You practice it without the kids there. Any skill you want to develop as a person, it takes practice. And when you talk about being really good at something and you think about creativity, like in music, you think about improvisation, where you're making up melodies on the fly. When you think about the top tier athletes, I always go to basketball. That's just one of my favorite sports to watch. Some of these NBA players that are running down the court and do this amazing behind the back pass, and then this other person can go up and do this amazing dunk and dodge a block at the same time. That person didn't run that drill and say, I'm going to do this with my hands and do this. But what that person did was spend hours and hours practicing how to dribble, spent hours and hours practicing how to shoot that ball and to learn the correct arc and to learn the correct physiology to shoot that ball. It's all that practice that you don't see. You have to have the core fundamentals and be good at a skill to then be able to create things out of that skill. And I think that that's something that sometimes we forget about when we watch a professional athlete, when we listen to a professional musician, when we watch a good teacher. They have spent hours and hours practicing something to be good at it. And so I would say that I would kind of end with that's where my focus has come over 20-year now career in education, is that some of those fundamental things still matter. That you can't get good at something just because you watched a YouTube video and you showed up somewhere. The YouTube video is knowledge, but you have to practice the skill. You have to develop, you have to put in the time to work. There's no other way to get good at something outside of that.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that's going to hear this and be like, well, I think after hearing this, I'm going to go practice an instrument as I feel obligated to, but in a good way, you know? I don't want that to slip.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, on those wise words, I guess all that's really left to say is thank you very much for being on the show. It's been a huge pleasure to hear your story and get much more of a human perspective on, an educator and especially a principal. Sometimes the principal and assistants, they get to be, put up on some social pedestal in the sense that, oh, they're kind of just like the kibosh mentioned before. So
Right.
it's nice that you're a real person.
I really appreciate the opportunity. I love talking with you anytime, but this has been awesome. So
Will do. Well, then, to all you guys listening, thank you very much. We'll be back again sometime and we will see you then. But bye bye for now.
awesome.